Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Oh, hi, everybody. Ezra Levant here. It's February 24th, and I'm coming to you live from Rebel World headquarters here in an undisclosed bunker in Toronto. And they're doing some construction next door, so I can hear some power tools. I hope that that sound doesn't interfere with our show today. I think that we had a huge victory in our battle against the unconstitutional, unscientific, political power trip lockdowns in Alberta. And I know that Sheila has made a video on the subject, and we expect that that video will be live within the hour of this live stream. Is that right, Justin?
Yeah, it should be.
In fact, do we have an unfinished version? In about 10 minutes. All right, so when that comes up, I'm going to show it to you. Are we premiering that? Is that what we're doing? Okay. So I'll just show a tease of it, but once we know the exact details. But it is the case involving the Whistle Stop Diner in the small town of Mirror, Alberta. Mirror is a small town where the restaurant is also a general store. You know, it's sort of the one, like if you've got 500 people. I mean, my high school was 1,800 people. So it's pretty small. Everybody knows everybody. And everybody, you know, almost a year into the pandemic, knows that it's not what it was hyped up to be. It's not Ebola. It's not the zombie apocalypse killing us all. And especially a place like Mirror where where everyone knows each other. I remember high school. 1,800 faces is a lot, but if you're in your cohort of 600 people, going from grade 10 to 11 to 12, you know, by the time you're in grade 12, you spent 3 years with 600 people. You probably don't know every single name, but you sort of recognize the faces, and you probably know half the kids' names. Well, imagine living in a town, village of 500 people, which is what, probably 200 families? So you'd say, oh, there's the Smith kid, oh, there's the Jones kid. So you would know everybody. You really would. If you live there for, you know, like I say, 3 years in high school, you pretty much know all the faces if you don't know the names. So all these people in the Whistle Stop Diner that you see here, they all know each other. Maybe not know each other very, very well, but they all know who's who, and they all recognize each other. And if someone was new in town, they would say, oh, who are you? Welcome. So if you're in a small, tight-knit community, in a village like that, and for a year you've been living under a lockdown that maybe made sense in the capital city of Edmonton or the big media city of Toronto, and you're out there in Mirror and you say, that's just not how it is. We don't need your virtue signaling, you know, World Health Organization directions. We're Mirror, Alberta, and we trust Chris Scott, the owner of our restaurant, and we're just going to go there. It's very different. And I think regular people just have had enough. And these are not professional activists, they're people in town. Now, it did start to attract some larger interest. People came in from out of town to support them. But it was very organic, very grassroots. The opposite of what's called sometimes in politics astroturf. You know what I mean by that? Sort of fake grassroots. There's real grassroots, and then the fake grassroots is called astroturf. That's the phrase. So, for example, a lot of professional protests on the left are astroturf. They're the same suspects every time. They just are given a different sign every week, and they're just told to come out and they get paid $50 or whatever. It's not that. And that's why these real grassroots organic uprisings are so much more politically powerful. I mean, when you see, there's a franchise in Canada called Black Lives Matter. It started in the United States. It's a corporation, huge revenues. And they've franchised, they've expanded with branch plants into Canada. And I say that because their narrative is not a Canadian narrative. Canada did not have slavery. Slavery was abolished in, what was it, 1793, if I'm remembering, by the governor of Upper Canada, Simcoe. And I think at the time there were a grand total of 6 black people in all of Toronto. And I don't know if they were slaves. 1793, thanks, Justin. So there was some slavery in pre-European times. I mean, various Indian tribes did have slavery, but in terms of black slavery, it really didn't get its roots in Canada. Canada was the place where slaves ran away. I'm not going to get into that whole subject. We've treated that many times. And in Alberta in particular, where I'm originally from, there just never ever was any slavery. Alberta was constituted as a province in 1905. Slavery had been abolished more than a century earlier. In fact, there were black cowboys who came to Alberta because it was so free and tolerant. As I've told you before, the local school where I lived at last in Calgary, John Ware School, was named after a black cowboy. So that's just how it was. So you graft on to Canada an American narrative. Black Lives Matter just doesn't work. It looks so fake. That's what I mean by AstroTurf. So in Canada, you have these AstroTurf protests, and they rename themselves all the time. You know, Occupy Toronto. Again, it's a knockoff of Occupy Wall Street. Wall Street really did need a bailout. In the 2008 financial crisis, nothing in Canada was bailed out. No banks failed. So that's this copycat stuff. Occupy Toronto didn't make sense because we didn't have the problems of Wall Street. Black Lives Matter Canada doesn't really make sense. I'm not saying that there was perfect equality in Canada. There are some old black communities, particularly in Nova Scotia, that had some troubles. But we never had the slavery, and we didn't have a lot of the historical problems in America. We just didn't, sorry. Not sorry, actually, thrilled. So I think a lot of us, when we see a protest, we say, oh, them again. Oh, it's Greenpeace, so it's a foreign-funded protest. Them again, them again. That's how I am when I see protests. And that's why these genuine grassroots protests are so interesting, because normal people never protest. Can you dig up Sheila's video? I think we put it up yesterday, of her at the Remand Center in Edmonton. And there's just a part of it near the front with a bunch of streeters. And again, these people, I'm going to show it to you, Justin's going to dig up the video. I don't think they've ever in their life been to a protest. They just never have. And it was sort of fun to watch them. They clearly didn't really know how to protest, so they just sort of went with it and just said what they wanted to say and had homemade signs. And people from different walks of life. It's very interesting to go to a real protest as opposed to an AstroTurf protest. I used to do the protest circuit as a journalist, especially when I was at Sun News. And my favorite question every time was, why are you here? And that would stump the protesters almost every time, because they didn't really know why they were there. Maybe they had a collateral reason, like they were being paid off to be there. Maybe they just didn't know the message and didn't want to embarrass the organizers. Almost every time when I would go to a professional protest and say, why are you here? I wouldn't get an answer. I would ask people about their signs. They often wouldn't know because they didn't make their own signs. And when I would find the protest leaders, they would get very nervous and cagey and not want to speak to me. Compare that to these anti-lockdown protests, which are the opposite. Every person there knows exactly why they're there. They're delighted to tell you because they feel like they're not being heard, which is why they're protesting. And they generally don't turn people, like I have seen some anger against the mainstream media for denouncing them as racist, which we saw in Edmonton. But there is something so qualitatively different between a fake AstroTurf protest and a real protest. It sounds like Justin has some of these clips ready. So this is from Sheila's video that I think went up yesterday, the day before. This is Sheila at the Edmonton Remand Center, which is one of the largest prisons in Canada. It's a maximum security facility because one of the things it does is hold people who were denied bail, which can be for a variety of reasons, including that they're a public danger. So it's a very strange place to put a Christian pastor who's never done a crime in his life, never done a violent thing in his life. He was thrown in this maximum security prison where he is today. I think today's his 8th day there. So there was you can imagine if someone was protesting outside this maximum security prison in Edmonton because they're Christian pastors inside. They don't need prompting when they're asked, why are you here? If you say to them, what does your sign mean? They don't say, talk to the boss, because they know why they're there. So without further ado, here's a few samples from Sheila's video at the Edmonton Remand Center.
Supposed to be known as a very conservative place that believes in freedom of religion and freedom of association. I never thought that Alberta would be the province locking up a Christian pastor.
We lived here for 15 years. We're as shocked as you. That's why we're back out here. And yeah, locking up pastors, from what I've seen, the whole world seems to be rather shocked about this.
I want to express my support for Pastor Coates, and it doesn't matter whether you agree with him and his beliefs. His beliefs are protected by our charter. And so I encourage Christians in this province, in this country, to stand up for our charter. And even if you disagree with the little semantics of what this church might stand for, they're protected. It doesn't matter. They don't disappear just because you disagree with them.
For me he died, for me he lives, and everlasting life and light he freely gives.
Yeah, I'm here because of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's because he's the head of the church, not any pastor, not Jason Kenney, not Dina Hinshaw. The Bible says he's the head of the church, and when government gets in the matter of church, they're crossing their boundary. And how they arrested Pastor James, that's totally inhumane, and it's actually unconstitutional. I would expect that in my country, in India, that's where I'm from, but I wouldn't expect that from Canada.
And what do you think about?
It's just a great video. They seem like such nice people from different walks of life and backgrounds. Very nice singing. You can be sure that, by the way, that they left their physical area neater when they left it than when they came to it. I've been to so many so-called environmentalist protests that leave the place just covered in trash and litter. There's such a different vibe at a conservative or a Christian protest as opposed to these Marxist pay-for-protesters mobs that we've seen from these American franchises, whether it's Occupy Toronto or Black Lives Matter. So very interesting. A huge number of people. I think this is a major problem for the government of Alberta. The government of Alberta is having a tough time in the polls, and anyone can project their own reasoning on that, because anyone who criticizes the government can say, oh, they're falling in the polls because they're not doing what I think they should do. So the NDP says, well, they're not spending enough. They're being too mean to leftists. They're being too mean to the teachers union. They're being too light on the lockdowns. But I saw a statistic that only 62% of United Conservative Party members are happy with Jason Kenney. Normally, that a leader's own party supports him, 80, 90%. Trump would love to tweet that 97% of Republicans support him, or whatever the stat was. I think that when the latest poll shows that only 62% of UCP, United Conservative Party, members support Kenney, it's not because he's too right-wing. It's not because he's not spending enough. I think it's actually the opposite reason. I think it's because he is being too hard in his lockdown. I think people are appalled by the fact that Jason Kenney is limiting pastors. And I know he would say that he's limiting them less than others, but Alberta is supposed to be the freest province in Canada. Now, I just tweeted something. Can you go to my Twitter feed? I just tweeted an article from La Presse, which is a large newspaper. I think it's online only these days, in Montreal. And they just changed their lockdown rules too. They've opened the movie theaters up in Quebec now. And movie theaters can hold up to 250 people. I don't know how large the average movie theater is. Does it hold 500 people? I can't imagine most theaters would be much bigger than that. So 250 people, and there's a debate, well, can they sell popcorn or not, which is sort of funny because, of course, that's how movie theaters make their money, is on the snacks and the drinks. But do you see that article I tweeted from the press? And I think I tweeted an English translation of it. Yeah. So this is in La Presse, and you can see it's in the Google Translate. You see that? It's from French to English. So this is a machine translation. Measures unfair to faith communities. Just scroll down a little bit and show that building there. So that's an enormous cathedral. That is enormous. Like, that's huge. That's just, I don't know which cathedral. Let me look at the caption there. Which cathedral is that? Despite the lightened health measures announced in certain sectors from February 26th, places of worship remain limited to 10 faithful, which causes discontent among religious leaders. Could you imagine a massive cathedral like that with, what's that, 50, 60-foot ceilings? 10 people in there. Echo, echo, echo. Yet a movie theater has 250. Hey, if they put a movie on in this church, would the government allow them to open? Scroll down, let's just read a little bit of this. From February 20, again, this is a machine translation. From February 26th, a cinema room will be able to accommodate 250 people, but places of worship remain limited to 10 faithful. Religious leaders protest against this, quote, discrimination. Yeah, it's totally not. We got to put it in scare quotes. The Archbishop of Quebec, Gerald Cyprien Lacroix, asked his flock to join their deputy in public health to complain. Yeah, I would think so. On Friday, Bishop Lacroix published a message in which he denounces the discrimination of double standards about cinemas and places of worship. Today is more difficult for me to express my solidarity with the decisions announced because they appear to me to be unreasonable and unfair towards the communities of faith, writes Monsignor Lacroix, who did not want to give any interviews. We cannot remain silent in the face of decisions taken by the authorities. If he wants to continue the dialogue with the government, Monsignor Lacroix invites his flock to express their point of view. Scroll down a little bit there. Yeah, so there's an imam there, Muslim imam, and obviously there's Jews in Quebec too, so this would apply to them. Look at that, like, look at the size of that. Imagine saying you can only have 10 people in that entire room. The lockdownists believe in that, but let's say you believe in something higher than lockdownism. Let's say you believe in a religion besides lockdownism. Let's say you have that belief, so you haven't fully succumbed to the superstitions of lockdownism. Let's say you actually enjoy going to church, learn something from it, and maybe feel something from it, religious, spiritual, emotional. Maybe you just like seeing other people in a non-work environment. People hopefully don't have their cell phones out, maybe singing along, praying along, listening to each other, getting a little encouraging words from the priest at the front. And only 10 of you are allowed, but if you go watch the latest Hollywood flick, 250 of you are allowed. You go to Costco and Walmart, they're unlimited for all intents and purposes, but only 10 of you in a church. Maybe that's discrimination. They put discrimination in scare quotes. You don't see that so obviously is discrimination. So people are starting to wise up that this is not about a virus. Maybe it never was. Maybe it was for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And we actually did flatten the curve. There has never been a hospital in Canada that, there's never been a province or even a single hospital that was overwhelmed by this virus. There just hasn't been. I haven't checked the Ontario stats in a few days, but last I checked, there's about 500 hospitals in Ontario. Last I checked, there were 200 and something patients in ICU in the whole province. So each pandemic ICU patient had 2 hospitals to himself. Flatten the curve was flattened. Don't overwhelm our hospitals. They never were. So this is about other things. And it's hard not to notice that one of the things it's about is picking on churches. Now, Justin, did you say that the whistle stop video is ready? Okay, well, I don't want to take the thunder out of the premiere, but let's give people, let's play what we call the cold open. That's the first 30 seconds or so. I haven't seen this yet. We were just processing it. Do we know when we're going to make this live? Maybe at like 1:30 or something? Is that the plan? Whatever you like. So it'll come. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it shortly after after this live stream. So let's go ahead and play the cold open. And I think my 9-volt batteries pooped on this thing here. But let's watch the cold open.
Whistle Stop Cafe in Mir.
Oh, I think
CMP say that business will face charges.
General community transmission does cost lives, and that is why this is irresponsible and selfish.
At what point do you have to say our elected officials aren't listening? They won't listen. They're never going to listen. So what are we going to do to take control of our own destiny?
And I'm not closing.
What is an Albertan? And an Albertan, in my mind, is Chris. Chris is a true Albertan, and there's many more to stand up. They're just waiting for that one person to do it, and the follow suit will come.
A show of defiance and desperation by restaurant owners across the province today. In a collective movement, they openly violated health restrictions and opened their dining rooms.
We have already provided billions of dollars of supports to businesses throughout the pandemic.
The majority of people have this idea that these subsidies that they're giving restaurants and other businesses are free money. They're not. That's my kids' money. That's my money maybe 5-10 years down the road.
Henshaw and Kenny, you've got to listen to us. This is so much bigger.
We cannot let the actions of a minority dictate, again, what the majority get to do.
Honestly, the things they say, I don't even know if they can hear the words coming out of their own mouths. The majority of Alberta is speaking, and they're speaking loud.
We're all going in together.
That's great. I think 9 of you just showed up in 3 helicopters.
And I came in this country 23 years ago as a war immigrant, and I choose to come here to enjoy freedom. Look what it came. You have no idea what support and respect you have, not only from me, Chris.
We're at the mercy of politicians right now. Every Albertan, in one way or another, whether they know it or not, they're being held against their will. People aren't allowed to earn a living. It's no matter what way you look at this, we're all political prisoners at this point.
All right, well, that's the cold open. But the hot news is that Chris won. He absolutely won. Now, in the rest of that video, which we'll show you in about an hour, Sheila, I presume, will describe the victory that was. I haven't watched the video. I've just seen that live with you for the first time. But Global News, Alberta Health leaked to Global News what they did. Alberta Health Service drops case, pays legal fees of Alberta Cafe that reopened in spite of COVID-19 rules. Now, I haven't had a chance to chat with Chad Williamson, the lawyer that's been working on this case with Sheila and Chris, the owner. But let's read this story together. Alberta Health Services has stopped pursuing legal action against a small-town cafe for defying the province's public health orders, and has even covered the owner's legal fees. I'm curious if that means what we've crowdfunded for Chad Williamson, because we've been covering those legal fees. I wonder what that means. I just simply don't know yet. In January, the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta reopened for dine-in services, even though it was not allowed due to COVID-19 restrictions. The cafe's owner, Christopher Scott, was taken to court by Alberta Health Services after he chose to keep his business open, even though it was ordered to close. AHS sought compliance and an injunction to have the court uphold the closure order. But recently, AHS dropped the case, saying in a statement, quote, "Upon the easing of restrictions and given that dine-in services are now permitted, AHS is no longer pursuing compliance with the executive officer order through the Court of Queen's Bench," unquote. On the Whistle Stop Cafe's Facebook page, Scott wrote that the decision was a win for those who are resisting COVID-19 restrictions. The decision could have broader consequences in terms of how Albertans respond to the pandemic. Quote, "If they see people defying the guidelines and the orders with impunity, then I think there's going to be a danger that more people will not comply. explained Lori Williams, an associate professor of policy studies at Mount Royal University in Calgary, who, might I add, has never lost a minute's pay during the lockdown. It's the lack of enforcement that Lorian Hardcastle said could be concerning. She's an, get this, associate professor of the Faculty of Law and Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. So again, the lockdown class, the professor class, the pundit class, the government worker class, the class that hasn't lost a day's pay, but I think the universities are being closed. So they've been paid to do nothing, and they're loving it. Those public examples of unenforced defiance, I think, can have the effect of prompting others to join in, she said. You don't say, sister, you don't say. In addition to backing off the court proceedings, AHS also footed the bill for Scott's defense. Now, I want to learn more about that because we were paying Chad Williams. Chad's a great lawyer. So if this is very exciting, if we're going to get money back for those legal bills, we can deploy our crowdfunding for others. AHS agreed to pay costs that are commonly awarded against the defendant on a discontinuance to cover costs that they have incurred to defend against the application, spokesperson Kerry Williamson wrote. I was surprised, though, to learn that they had paid his costs, given that when this enforcement activity commenced, he was in violation of public health laws, and quite blatantly so, Hardcastle explained. She said it's one thing to stop the legal proceedings because the rules changed, but another to compensate the defendant. Well, of course, because she's never lost a day's pay. Williams added, this is another example of the rules changing after Albertans publicly opposed them. Yeah, that's called democracy, sister. If a business can defy the orders and then the government changes the orders to make it no longer a violation, again, it raises questions about why the restrictions were in place, she said. It does indeed. Scott still faces 2 charges from the RCMP, however, for being in contravention of order of the medical officer of health. Those could come at a cost. Quote, it's difficult to predict what a judge might do in terms of those fines. Certainly they are higher for a business, Hardcastle explained. Another Central Alberta restaurant owner, Carlos Siguenza, from the Noble Fox in Bashaw, Alberta, also faces charges, and we're helping him too, by the way. She did a great interview up there. With more protests and resistance regarding restrictions, Williams said the provincial government needs to step up enforcement. Got it. So the people are protesting, better smash them down. Follow through to not lose control of the pandemic response. Smash them. They've got to be clear about what the guidelines are and clear that they take them seriously. Otherwise, there's a danger of increased noncompliance and resentment. Hey guys, I'm worried you're going to resent things, so we're going to smash you. Resentment of those who are compliant. Yeah, you know what? How about everybody chooses their own fear level? If you want to hide under your bed all day, I won't stop you. Just don't make me hide under my bed, and don't make the good people of Mirror, Alberta do so either. So very interesting news. I want to learn more about it. I haven't talked to Chris in over a week. Chris Scott of the Whistle Stop Cafe, because that's very exciting. I should talk to Chad, the lawyer, too. Sounds like there is more legals to fight. Sounds like there is another legal action that is still alive, the RCMP one there. That's Trudeau's RCMP, so I think they may well proceed against this guy. But I find it very encouraging. And so if you have the diner rebellion, which looks very successful, and you have a massive protest in support of a pastor who he himself won't bend the knee. He's still in maximum security prison today, 8th day in a row. Other churches, this is spreading. Yeah, this is what democracy looks like, as the left says. Why don't you throw every Christian in prison? I mean, I know why, because that's illegal, it's immoral, it's against our Constitution. And politically speaking, that might just get the Premier's support from 62% amongst party faithful to 52% and 42%. And you know what? Maybe it's time for the Premier of Alberta to be more like the Governor of Florida, who has said, you know what? We're done. We're done. If you want to wear a mask, go to it. You want a vaccine, have it. But we're not going to live like we're in prison. Or in the case of Pastor James Coates, actually is in prison. And I think there's an enormous demand for that. And of course the media party would squawk, and of course the public health deep state would squawk. But they do anyways, don't they? All right, I think we got a lot of super chats coming. Sniggy Beaver, $10. French people in Canada were considered just good as slave labor not too long ago. English people used to say speak white towards French, which means speak English. I am looking for reparations here. Well, you know, Canada is the fusion of the French and the English, right? The French and the English battled each other in Canada for centuries, actually. I didn't know till I visited Newfoundland the French history there, and even the French place names there. And of course, the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, I think that was 1763, sort of ended those fights. But there was a sort of reconciliation. The French were allowed their laws, their religions, their schools. I don't know my Quebec history enough to answer your point there, but I put it to you that the French people in Quebec had a very different course than the French people of Louisiana. And the French fact is very much alive in Quebec. The language, the culture, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it's eroding, mainly mass migration of people who are not connected to the French culture or French language. But that's on Quebec, really. No, I mean, listen, I'm not going to say that the French people were not discriminated against in Canada, but I'm going to say that compared, especially 300 years ago, compared to other minorities, other battles, they did manage to preserve their religion, their schools, and other things, and it's hardwired in our Constitution. Alex Davy Duke, $5. Hi, Alex. How could Jason Kenney allow a pastor to be arrested? What the hell is wrong with him? I seriously can't believe this is Alberta. Fire Kenney. You know, it's interesting you say that, because when this pastor was thrown in jail, Dina Hinshaw, the public health officer for Alberta, said, oh, the RCMP put him there. That's a lie. I'm not sure if we can dig up that quote easily, because I don't know the exact words she used, Justin. But Dina Hinshaw said, oh yeah, the RCMP did that. No, that's not how our system works, and Dina Hinshaw knows it. In fact, the notice that, can you go to Sheila's Twitter feed? Her pinned tweet, the one right at the very top of her Twitter feed, is the closure order on the front door of the church at Grace Life Church west of Edmonton. And I'm going to try and remember to encourage Sheila to take a close-up of that when she goes there next, because yeah, can you zoom in on the picture? Alberta Health Services, close to the public. Can you pump up the font size there a little bit? So when you have a closure notice, it's usually signed. If not personally signed, it's issued by an officer who has the right to do that. Thank you. So Alberta Health Services has ordered this premises close to the public. Grace Life Church of Edmonton is ordered to close to public access until such time, blah, blah, blah. It is an offense to destroy this or remove this. For more information, please contact Environmental Public Health. The closure order can be viewed here, and is at the bottom of it there, or there's nothing lower? Okay, I'm going to ask Sheila to take another photo of that when she goes there, because typically these are signed by the public health officer. When Adam Skelly's restaurant was shut down and then 100 police came to raid the joint, that was signed by Eileen Davila, the public health officer for Toronto. So when Dina Hinshaw says, no, wasn't me. No, it's the RCMP. No. The RCMP don't get their authority under some public health order. They're not, going around, to restaurants saying, oh, you should put those in the fridge, or you should get rid of those old moldy things, or oh, I saw a mouse. That's Alberta Health, and the RCMP can be brought in some cases to help enforce things. I'm skeptical of that, by the way, because every public health law I've ever read says you've got to go to court to get a special order for that. Which is why I think they dropped the case against the whistle stop. I'd have to talk to a lawyer, but I think the reason they actually dropped the case is that for the first time ever, someone started challenging the legal basis for an injunction. So when Dina Hinshaw says the RCMP threw the pastor in jail, the police don't have that ability. The police have the ability to lawfully arrest you if there's some reasonable grounds, to take you to a detention and hold you until the first possible chance you get to go to a justice of the peace or another court to ask for bail. And at that point, the police are not the deciders anymore. For a very, Alberta at standoff with Edmonton area church over COVID rules. Dr. Hinshaw says she can't intervene. She's the one who originated it. Let's read this. You found that. Great. Fine. Alberta's top doctor says her hands are tied. Guys, I made a joke about handcuffs. We handcuffed the pastor. My hands are tied, guys. Oh, she's a card. Alberta's top doctor, I love that phraseology. Is she Alberta's best doctor? A most experienced doctor, best beloved doctor? Is she an innovator in open heart surgery? No, she's a politician with an MD. That is not a top doctor. I don't even think she has any patience. Alberta's top doctor says her hands are tied, guys. Sorry. When it comes to a rural church that is defying public COVID-19 health orders by hosting Sunday services with hundreds of maskless congregants. They're the worst, eh? Chief Medical Health Officer Dr. Dina Hinshaw says she helps set policy, but it's up to Alberta Health Services and other law enforcement officials to take action. Guys, I'm sorry. I know I'm the boss, but I gotta blame someone else. It's critical that the enforcement of laws in the province is done in an independent way by those bodies who have the authority under legal frameworks to create orders or penalties. Hinshaw told a virtual news conference Monday, I have spoken with chiefs of police and Alberta Health Services to be clear that a gradually escalating process of deterrence is what we have set out the orders to be able to do. Oh, so she did. She did set out the process. I thought she just said she didn't. And it's a health order. Well, who ordered it? Isn't she the chief? Didn't they just call her the top doctor? Doesn't she work for the province, the government? Is there someone else who's in charge here? Grace Life Church, located just west of Edmonton on Highway 627 in Parkland County, defied health inspectors on site. Well, who do those health inspectors work for? They don't work for the RCMP. Hosted 300 people for its weekly service, said health officials. Who do they work? But they work for Dina Hinshaw, don't they? The Sunday before, it had 290, and health rules on distancing and masking were not followed. Alberta Health Services has been dueling with the church for 6 weeks over following COVID-19 health restrictions. RCMP issued a $1,200 fine. AHS delivered an executive order last month directing the church to comply or close down. The church ignored it. Well, who signed that order? Is that the order we saw on their door? I just hear in my ear from Justin that the orders are actually not signed in Alberta. So they're just sent out by the bureaucracy. Well, is Dina Hinshaw not the chief medical officer for the province? Is she not at the top of the pyramid? Is she literally blaming, the person who photocopied it, or like the typist who typed it out? Is that what Dina Hinshaw said? Because you can't blame the RCMP. The RCMP, I don't even think they should be involved. I think there's jurisdictional issues. I think there's Police Act and RCMP Act issues. I don't think they're following the law, but I don't know if that's being litigated yet. They don't have the power to imprison. A cop can't come to your home and say you're going to jail. He can say, I'm arresting you on reasonable grounds of this or that, and I'm going to hold you until a judge can hear my side of the story and your side of the story. So you can be jailed for like a day or two by a cop while you're waiting for a judge. So that's why the more brutal cops arrest you on a Friday afternoon knowing you're going to spend the weekend in the clink. We've seen that before. But the cops don't have the power to jail you. A judge could. So the cop brings you to the judge, and then the cops, like, they can give what little evidence they might have in this case. But then it's the pro and the con, the plaintiff and the defendant, or in this case it would be the prosecutor and the defense lawyer. So the prosecutor would probably be someone from Alberta Justice, and they would be prosecuting at the direction of Alberta Health. That's the party. It's not a criminal act. It's not the Queen versus so-and-so. You're not enforcing the criminal code. It is Dina Hinshaw who is putting these people in prison. It's not the RCMP. It's not the prison. The prison's a place. The courts say, here's your prisoner, and they say, okay, tell us when he gets out. The prison didn't put him in prison. The RCMP may have driven him there, but they aren't the one who put him in prison. The judge did, only at the demand of Dina Hinshaw's office. Now, I can understand why she's lying, because would you want to be the name and the face of the person who threw a pastor in prison for 8 days and counting? Ooh, it's not very Albertan. You know what Alberta's motto is, right? Fortis et liber, strong and free. My Latin pronunciation is wrong, obviously. Strong and free. So you're the chief public health officer for Strong and Free Alberta, and you're throwing a pastor in prison. Got it. I'd lie too if that was me. Ronnie DRZ, $35. Hi Ezra, have the courts not failed us by allowing basically 1 year of unchallenged repression of the people and our charter rights? Why no decisions? P.S. Great spot by you on Alex Jones' show. You know what? I said this to lawyer Manny Montenegrino the other day. And I said, where are the judges? They're afraid. And he said, Ezra, I haven't seen a proper challenge being put to a judge. I haven't seen the cases. He's largely right on that. I mean, I think there's been fewer than 10 cases heard in all of Canada, and they've often been very narrow. Hudson's Bay took one to court. We challenged the quarantine for our head of video, Efron Monsanto. But the number of cases, I mean, we have filed constitutional litigation in Saskatchewan, and the Justice Centre has filed constitutional litigation in other provinces, but I don't think they've actually been heard by courts. Now, I think that that's a problem. These should be fast-tracked. I'm not going to absolve the judges, that's for sure. But I think that all of society has failed. Opposition parties have failed. Law professors have failed. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association has failed. Conservative institutions have failed. And all because of peer pressure. Isn't it amazing that it's the churches and the diners that are saving us? SA, $14. Any thoughts about the proposed guaranteed basic income bill, C-273? Thank you. I haven't read it, but I think governments... you know what, let me get back to one thing that we saw in that cold open, as we call it, that opening clip for Sheila's vid. Some politician, I didn't catch her name, was saying, we provided billions of dollars to these restaurants. What's their problem? And then you heard Chris Scott, the restaurateur, saying, we don't want your subsidies. That's the thing. Governments say, oh, we'll just throw more money at you and don't ask where the money's coming from. That's not a solution. The solution is let these people go back to work, school, church, whatever. It really bugged me in that cold open when Dina Hinshaw said actions of a majority dictating to the actions of a minority dictating to the majority. No. First of all, minorities are precisely what are protected in the Charter of Rights. Christian minorities, Jewish, Sikh, Muslim, Hindu, whatever you are. I suppose the individual is the ultimate minority, a minority of one. So in fact, that's exactly backwards. The Constitution protects minorities from the majority. Majorities generally don't need to be protected because they're majorities. So she's got it backwards. Pastor James Coates and his 300 congregants may be the only people in the entire province who feel the way they do, but the Charter gives them that right. I suspect they're not the only people in the province who feel that way. Alex Daviduc, $5. Did you see David from Viva Fry interview John Carpe? Great that Carpe, like you, Ezra, knows to facts and science around this fake pandemic. Thanks. I didn't see that, but I'm really glad that interview happened. Chris Lynch, $10. I live in Cold Lake, Alberta. It seems many folks here liked Kenny better when the media hated him. when he wasn't afraid of Notley or the media. Now he's a hypocrite and coward. He needs to go back to Ontario. The thing is, if you're in Edmonton or any other capital, and if you're in the legislature, you know, Ralph Klein used to call it dome syndrome. I remember Preston Manning used the phrase auto-washed. Preston used to say, you're representing Ottawa to the people instead of the people to Ottawa. When you're in that building, when you're surrounded by other politicians, the media party, bureaucrats, career bureaucrats, government unions, the swamp, you start to become like them. You know, lay down with dogs, get up with fleas. And one of the antidotes to that is to get out into the people, as what did Ralph Klein used to say, Bob and Irma or something from, and he would pick a small town. What is, you know, it wasn't Bob and Irma, it was some, Bob and Martha or something. What does Martha from Three Hills think? He would say something like that. And that's the reality check that Ralph Klein would use. Because Ralph Klein was so working class and so aesthetically different from the permanent political class, there was less of a risk of him getting dome syndrome. And he was very folksy and populist, and that's what Alberta wants. I think. I mean, I'm based here in Toronto now, so I'm slightly out of touch. Mark Heckner, $5. I watched The Death of Stalin the other night as per your recommendation. It was funnier than expected. Funny, I mean, you need that funny, like, to stomach the brutal parts, don't you? Someone sent me an email saying they watch Apocalypto based on my referral, and they liked it. I actually finished watching it just last night, and it was far more violent than I remembered. AMT, $10. A coach said that in a few months all banks, government from all countries will call in loans. If you can't pay, you will lose assets and not be able to borrow again. This to pay for government debt. Can this happen? You might be talking about something called a bail-in, but those are generally for banks. I think the borrowing is out of control. I think it risks inflation. It risks overprinting of money. I think it's one reason why cryptocurrencies are doing well. People want to get out of money that can be manipulated by the Fed or the Bank of Canada, depending on where you are. Bracketor, $5 the other day, argued with a right-winger in your chat who's anti-free speech, increasingly common. Isn't that a bit like a fish who's anti-water? Well, we are in an extreme time, and you know, I was just looking at the book. I just received a copy of 1984 again, and what they talked about there, the ministry of truth, was the ministry of lies. Ministry of peace was the ministry of war. The ministry of love was the ministry of torture. That was sort of crazy when he said it back then, but it's not even controversial now, because that's the world we live in now. That's wokeism, that's political correctism, that's using the right pronouns. I mean, you can't even say, you have to say that men are women and women are men. So what he talked about in that book, 1984, it's like when I remember reading that book, Thank You for Smoking or something by, I think it was P.J. O'Rourke. And it was written before the anti-smoking hysteria really set in. So he was sort of predicting this hysterical future. And by the time I read the book, it was like it had all come true. So the book lacked its punch because every insane thing he was sort of writing about, which was such an exaggeration when he wrote it, it was true by the time I read the book. And 1984 was insane when I first read it, but it's just madness. It's the norm now. I keep thinking of the word indigenous, which is what you call people who, until about 5 minutes ago, were called Aboriginal. And if you look at the law, it's called the Indian Act. And the geographical political units are called Indian reserves, and the political entity is actually called an Indian band. So those are the legal words in the Indian Act. If someone said, yeah, the Indian Act. Scroll down a bit to definition of Indians. There shall be maintained in the department an Indian register, in which shall be recorded the name of every person who's entitled to be registered as an Indian. The names in the Indian registry, blah, 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 the Indian register. Add or delete. And then they define what it is. So this feels extremely politically incorrect, doesn't it? Like to say Indian Act. By the way, most Indians I know love that word. I think I told you I got a buddy, all he wears is Indian brand clothing. Do you want to grab like Indian is a motorcycle, and it's really cool. And just the word Indian, and unlike, the various sports teams, they don't plan to change their name. They just don't. And like that's a hell of a motorcycle. Like click that one in the middle there, bottom middle. Look at that. How amazing is that? Yeah, pump that up. That's the 2021 Indian Scout Bobber motorcycle. I don't know what that is, but click on that exact page there. So you can see they're not shying away from the word Indian, right? This is the Indian homepage. Yeah, the Scout Bobber. So Scout is also an Aboriginal phrase. Look at that. Is that the most gorgeous bike you've ever seen? I mean, listen, there's some very, you can like that's, look at those exhaust pipes. Look at the chrome. But look at that. That is, so I got a buddy, he's an Indian chief actually. All he wears is Indian brand clothes. And wouldn't you? Like if you were Indian and that extremely cool thing bore the name of your people, how could you not buy one? Like, I don't think it would work to call that Jew. It just wouldn't work. But if, like, every cool sports team was called, like, the Maccabees or the Israelites, like how many sports teams? You got the Edmonton Eskimos, the Blackhawks, the Redmen was my high school. What's the Washington Redskins? I mean, Redskins, I get it, but if the Braves, the Atlanta Braves, if Kansas City Chiefs, if every cool thing was named after your people, it's just so impossible that would be named after the Jews. The Jews are the least sporty people in the world, I think. There's a joke in the movie Airplane. A guy's on the plane, do you have any light reading? And the stewardess says, yes, here's a pamphlet called Famous Jewish Sports Heroes. Like, it's a dumb joke, but it's so true. I mean, I can name the sports star. There's Edelman, right? There's Sandy Koufax from like 70 years ago. And I think I've just named all the Jewish sports. I think there's like one Jew in the NHL. Not a lot of Jews in sports. If there was a motorcycle brand that cool called the Israelites, just called Israelite or whatever, because it would be weird to call it Jew. And if half a dozen sports teams, like the coolest, I would be wearing that all the time just because it would make me feel a lot cooler than I really am. So this is an extremely long tangent, but my point is, the law says Indian Act, but soon it became racist to say the word Indian, even though we haven't changed the law. Then everything was Aboriginal. And in fact, for a while, the department was called the Department of Northern and Aboriginal Affairs, I think. And now you can't say Aboriginal because that's apparently racist, although I don't think it is. So now you say Indigenous. And that will be cool for a few years. And then once everyone starts saying Indigenous, then they'll change it to something else. And the reason they do this is so that they can always be one step ahead of you, so they can hold something over you. They can have a secret language that you don't have, and they can create little traps for you. And if you say Indian instead of Aboriginal, or if you say Aboriginal instead of Indigenous, you're not racist. But they can say you are, so they can put you on the back foot, so they don't actually have to deal with the problems in the Indian Act. Anyone who thinks that the biggest problem in the Indian Act is the word Indian, instead of looking at the, frankly, apartheid-style racism embedded in the Act. It's insane. I don't know if we haven't done videos on the Indian Act in a while, but it has embedded within it. Like if you're an Indian farmer on a reserve in the West, you can't sell your produce without the permission of Ottawa. Your will, last will and testament, can be reviewed by Indian politicians called the Band Council if they want. That would never happen to someone off reserve. Land, you can't bequeath land because it's owned communist style socially, which is, and you can understand if you look historically why all these things are there. Oh, we can't let the white man take advantage of the Indian, so we can't let them sell their produce because the white man would swindle them. We can't let an Indian write his own will because the white man would trick him. We can't let an Indian get a mortgage because the white bankers will steal from him. So I think that's the rationale there. You can't sell land, you can't alienate land because the white man will undermine him. So if you're being generous, you could say it was designed to protect Aboriginal people. But the result of treating people like children, because you would do all those things for a child. You'd say to a child, oh, you can't sell your property, you can't, you can't write a legal document like a last will and testament, we got to protect you. You would treat a child that way. But if you treat an entire community based on race, you saw the definition there, as children, you will stunt their social, economic, commercial, citizenship growth. One of the ways you succeed is if you're allowed to fail. So that Indian Act is terrible. I think it's racist, and by the way, it was studied by apartheid South Africa. I don't know if you know this, Justin. The Indian Act was studied as a template for South Africa. I don't think a lot of people know that. Apartheid South Africa is gone. Indian Act remains on the book. So anyone who says, oh, I am more concerned about the name Indian in the Indian Act, I'm more concerned about the name Edmonton Eskimos than I am about the Indian Act, they're a faker. They're a faker. Because if you really cared, you would deal with the underlying problem. I remember talking to a great professor from Eugene, Oregon, who we were talking about Mark Twain, because Mark Twain's books have language in it that is, the way we're talking about Indian, Aboriginal, Indigenous, about black people. You can imagine the N word, for example. So do you say black? Do you say African American? Do you say person of color? What do you say? Well, this professor who's black said, and I'll never forget it, he said, you can call, the new word can be sir. Is it, excuse me, do you prefer African American, person of color, colored person? He said, you can call me sir, but if you haven't fixed the underlying problems in the black community, what have you done? So all this talk about semantics and jargon and terminology, he said, he's a great professor, we got to get him back on. I don't know if he's retired, probably retired. He said, that's all a distraction from actually fixing problems. And he's right, and the light went on for me in that conversation. It was a wonderful conversation. And he was saying, why can't we just read Mark Twain? And this is an extension of Newspeak and Orwellianism, and this is an answer to your question there. Because you control people if you can say, oh, you used the wrong word. You said Aboriginal, and although that was cool 5 minutes ago, we've all moved on. Oh, you said tranny or trans, but we've moved on to non-binary. You said transgender, you bigot. We say non-binary. Like it's about tricks and traps and putting the other person down and saying you're the only enlightened ones and having secret codes and messages. It's very classist too, by the way. Let's hurry up through these super chats. Unjust on Trudeau, $2. Do you think Teresa Tamerlane is a direct descendant? No, I don't. I think the names are completely different. Alex David Duke, $5. Canada, the top anti-lockdown activist with hugs over masks. Vladislav Sobolev, Chris Sky, among others, which is seems better than the USA. Chris Sky is a hoot, and we have a great video from David Menzies with him when he arrived at Pearson the other day. Jake Foth, $50. Thanks, Jake. That's very generous. Mark Owens, 2121. Trudeau is a chicken sucker? Oh, maybe that's not a chicken. All right, well, I'm not going to read that. Justin Beaver, $10. Please tell me why we hear nothing from the two Michaels family. If my husband was detained for 2 years, I would be screaming and yelling and protesting. Are they being paid off? Maybe they were told, be quiet or you'll make things worse. Wouldn't surprise me if the Department of Foreign Affairs said, be quiet or it'll make things worse. By the way, being quiet hasn't made things better, has it? There's still, I'd have to calculate, they were, I think, kidnapped December 10th, 2018, I think. So it's got to be over 800 days now. Alex David Duke. I forgot Adam Skelly. Fantastic job he's doing explaining the simple facts around the medical pandemic BS. Just fantastic, like you, Ezra. Thanks, Alex. Janet CH, $10. Thank you. Well, thank you. Sinisa Kadich, $10. Thanks. Alex again, thank you. Need most egregious constitutional breach case, most sympathetic plaintiff, most skilled lawyer before the Supreme Court. For Canada, John Carpe. Yeah, you need a good client and a good fact pattern. It's me, $10. Breathing Sunshine, $5. When are you going to admit that the Liberal leak was real? Everything it spoke of has come to pass in the time frame stated. Wake up to the tyranny. You're talking about that letter which was purported to be drafted by some Liberal Party official in some committee. And listen, I'll remind you what I said and what I didn't say. I said that the provenance and the authorship of that letter was not real. That wasn't really a Liberal memo from the Liberal Party, and I explained why, because I know a little bit about party politics, and the purpose of the Liberal Party is not to generate policy, it's to fundraise, find candidates, and door knock. The reason it was styled as a Liberal memo is precisely so you would find it titillating and dramatic, as opposed to what that letter really was, which is a dark series of predictions and scenarios, some of which have absolutely come true. But if they were signed by the actual author, they would be written off as speculation, which they were, and as you point out, many of those things have come true. I'm just saying, there's no basis whatsoever for believing that actually is a Liberal Party document, and there is basis for thinking it's not a Liberal Party document. As far as the predictions and the scenarios, there's a truthiness to them because they are in the mindset of the Trudeau Liberals. I'm just saying you don't have to say, aha, that was written by the Deputy Vice President of the Liberal Party Committee for that such and such. You don't have to say that to be mad about what's going on with the lockdown. But don't build your house on a foundation of some guy says this is from the Liberals. It's not from the Liberals. The Liberals do not make policy. Liberals don't care about policy. I'm talking about the Liberal Party of Canada. That's not what they do. If they have a policy meeting, it's just to let people vent and feel good. They do exactly what Gerald Butts, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, and a handful of other advisors say. They don't listen to their grassroots. It's not built that way. C. St. J, $7. Check out Dr. Henshaw's Deputy Medical Officer from Wuhan. Thanks for all you do. I didn't know the Deputy Medical Officer was from Wuhan. That may not be relevant where they're from. I mean, my beef with Theresa Tam is not that she's ethnically Chinese. I think she's from Hong Kong originally. My beef with her is that she worked on staff as an advisor for the World Health Organization and was part of the January 21-22 cover-up meetings that hid from the world the nature of the virus. My beef with Theresa Tam is not her ethnicity, it's her politics. Brian Moore, $5. Henshaw should be fired if only for her ignorance over the powers of her office and the fundamentals of how a democratically elected government works. Well, look, she's not the boss. There's an elected government, elected premier, elected cabinet who are the boss. I think all across the Western world, elected officials have to take back the power from the unappointed Anthony Fauci wannabes who are having the time of their lives. They've never been so popular. They've never been so obeyed before. That has to stop. Alex David, you $5. Great job, Justin. You are a one-man studio. You miraculously make Rebel News the equal of a multi-million mainstream media newsroom. Thanks. Team effort, he says. Richard Bialeski, €20. Thank you, Richard. Fraser McBurney, $10. Ezra, I am a political refugee, as are over 1 million other Canadians were. I was born in Quebec, as was my father and grandfather. We were forced out of Quebec by the language laws. Yes, I'm not downplaying that. I'm just saying I don't know how the French were treated back in the day. I'm just not an expert on that. My own father left Quebec after the FLQ crisis. He was a student in McGill, and I think that's what made him decide to get the heck out. Ray W., £5. Everyone should watch Thank You for Not Smoking, the NRA and the USA did. Yeah, I mean, I started reading the book and I thought this is funny, but it happened already. Viking Insane, $2. Ezra, you could rock a Hebrew Harley. Hebrew Harley, Hebrew, that's the right word. Hebrew Harley. There's a kind of hot dog called Hebrew National. Have you ever seen that? Hebrew National. It's like a Shopsy's hot dog, they might even sell it at Costco. See, that's cool, but again, that's a food thing. So it's not as cool as a motorcycle. It's close. Having a hot dog called Hebrew National is close to the coolness of that amazing Indian motorcycle. That motorcycle is such a beautiful work of art. Just looking at it would be a pleasure, let alone riding that thing. Hebrew National, kosher beef Franks. Okay, it's not quite as cool as the motorcycle, but I'd say it's a close second. Like if I had a choice of a motorcycle called Hebrew National or a hot dog, depends how hungry I am, is the answer. Let me hurry up here. Let me see how fast I can go through these. Ray W, £5. Hi, Ezra. I was quite surprised to see Israel introduce COVID passports. Is that true? I don't know if it's true. Wouldn't surprise me. I am not impressed with their mass vaccination. It makes me nervous. And by the way, I don't think it has changed the outbreaks any differently than places that didn't have the mass vaccinations. It makes me nervous. And I don't like the civil liberties aspect of what you've just described. Nathan Pin on $10, why not just call them Native Americans? It makes sense. Well, you do that. You think that's better? That's racist. They would say. Who's they? You know what I remember? Can you Google it quickly? I know we're over time. I think the Washington Post did an actual survey of actual Indians about the Redskins. 9 out of 10 said, we don't care. They literally don't care. I think they probably found it cool. And I'm telling you, if there was like the Chiefs, they just won, right? That's how deep I am on the football scene. They crushed it. The Chiefs lost? Who's Tom Brady? It's the Buccaneers. It's the Buccaneers. The Chiefs lost. Brady was the Buccaneers. You can see I'm totally into my American football. I can't believe I got that wrong. I'm sorry. It just shows you how sporty I am. Look at this. Yeah, thank you. Let me save myself from that deeply embarrassing Super Bowl fact. Look, can you tell I'm not that sporty? Look at this. New poll finds 9 in 10 Native Americans aren't offended by Redskins' name. This was a massive story. Is this New York Times or Washington Post? I can't remember. Washington Post. Can you scroll down a little bit? Let's just read the headline. 9 in 10 Native Americans say they're not offended by the Washington Redskins name, according to a new Washington Post poll that shows how few ordinary Indians have been persuaded by a national movement to change football teams. Isn't that incredible? Now, the first thing that a Canadian wokester would say, you said Native American, you said Indian, you said Redskin, to which actual Indigenous people say, yeah, we don't mind. That's a white thing. Caring about that is what, there used to be what white people like, pumpkin spice lattes. What do white people like? White people like joining Black Lives Matter and campaigning against the Redskins. Actual Native Americans, to use the Washington Post phraseology, don't care. All right, let's hurry up. Gotta hurry up. Fraser McBurney, $5. Bringing back memories. My friend, grandfather, we knew him as Pop Tatum in the 20s, was a racer for Indian motorcyclists. He was one of the coolest men I knew. Well, it looks like an amazing motorcycle. Blaine Scott, $10. Hi, Ezra. After arriving for work this morning at Magna, I was laid off because my medical exemption for mask-wearing accommodation is now a job-protected leave of absence. Please help. I just don't understand what that means. But maybe go to fight the fines, although it's not really a fine. I don't know what your terminology means. Stephen, $5. Call the Beef Angel to swoop in some Hebrew National Franks. I think the Beef Angel would come in and he would like you see people follow behind royalty and throw flower petals behind. Maybe the Beef Angel, and behind them as they're walking, this little Hebrew National Franks. I'm just brainstorming. I'd better call it quits now while we're ahead. It's 1:09. Thanks everybody for participating. Thanks to all the super chatters. I think we're going to roll out Sheila's video momentarily, so stick around for that. Do we have a dog video today? Indeed we do. Thanks to everyone for super chatting. I can't believe I got the Buccaneers versus the Chiefs wrong. That shows you how out of touch I am with the Super Bowl, but I got to own it. I got to get back to work. There's so much to do, so I'll talk to you later, and here's the dog video.
Thank you all for coming. Let me just say how truly, deeply thrilled it is to be experiencing this.